Hey there, beautiful people. It's always a pleasure to see you guys. And today we're going to be talking about temperament and personality. This is a subject I love to talk about because not many people are true and honest to themselves, to what their need, what their body, what their mind, what their emotions need. And there is a big difference because between who you naturally are and who we become as life passes, right? So let me go ahead and give some background because we are going to cover temperament and personality from certain perspectives, right? It's specifically from kind of a Western morphological perspective. It's going to be a big base for us. So does anyone here know the difference between temperament and personality to begin with? Well, we'll go ahead and mention it. Temperament is our original tendency from a genetic and endocrinological composition, so our nature. It is not specifically clear how much is genetic and epigenetic, because as you guys know, we're basically the same genetically. We do have a couple differences, obviously, but epigenetic studies have figured out that the mother's emotional programming, the experiences that she lives when she's pregnant with an infant, with a fetus, will affect their epigenetic programming. So basically what genes go on or off, just that's not really such like a good term, but are locked or unlocked, right? The genes are there, but they get like a certain lock put on them, so they can't really be expressed easily. And that's kind of the epigenetics of it. But essentially we come kind of predetermined with certain tendencies, and that is our temperament. It's kind of our emotional, physiological, mental makeup and tendencies. As opposed to our personality, which is our behaviors, cognitions, and environmental patterns that evolve from environmental factors as you grow up. So one is your true nature that you're born with, and as you're when you are exposed to life, as life happens, and you adapt to it in the best way possible, or you learn something. So an example that I use, let's say child is very rebellious and intense, and he's questioning a lot, but then every time he does that, his dad, or let's say he has an alcoholic father with a short temper, let's say he gets angry at him and he beats him, and so the child, as a defense mechanism, learns to control that part of himself, and maybe he can learn to be more of an entertainer, more pleasant, or he can learn to kind of be more quiet and introverted, even though he's more extrovert naturally. So those changes to yourself that you make, the way you adapt to life, what you learn from life that works or doesn't work, or is more efficient according to your consciousness or unconscious, that's your personality, right? So I just like to recommend this awesome book that explains this very well. It's by my mentor, Peter Resnick, and I'm studying with him currently, master's in therapeutic phenomenology. And sorry, there we go. So highly recommend this book. And this is more of a Western perspective, because as we know, most of you guys have heard about the doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, which is more of an Indian perspective, or more Ayurvedic perspective, which is a combination of their 5 elements in 3 constitutions. The constitution is both physical and mental as well. And we are composed proportionally of 3, right? And obviously the Chinese have their own system. So these ancient cultures know and honor that we are similar, but we're also different. And those differences need to be honored as well as similarities, right? This is more of an ancient Egyptian, or comes from the ancient Egyptians. And there is a lot of reference to it in the ancient texts, such as the Old Testament. A lot of it is a little encoded. But for example, we have in the book of Ezekiel, the cherubim that have 4 faces, one of a man, lion, an ox, and an eagle, which is these archetypes for these 4 temperaments, which we're going to be speaking of. And Hippocrates also mentioned these. He gave them slightly different names, but as we know, kind of the wise scientific men of Egypt, they learned all this, right, from Egypt, right? So sorry, from Greece. So like all the ancient philosophers of Egypt, a lot of what they took, a lot of their teachings, they took that from Egypt. They went to study in Egypt, or they studied with people that studied in Egypt. And this is one of the main schools of thought that they took from there, right? He gave them slightly different. For example, instead of nervous, which we're going to be mentioning here, he called them melancholic, right? Because he said they have the most or higher tendency to be depressed, to get melancholy. And we'll talk about kind of differences between that, right? So in ancient Egypt, there is kind of this sphinx that's oriented towards the four directions, and the fall equinox was originally pointing towards the Leo constellation. The spring equinox pointed to the Aquarius constellation, which is symbolized by a man. The winter solstice by an eagle, which is the ancient kind of animal or symbol for Scorpio. Currently it is a scorpion, but in the ancient times it was an eagle. The whole myth of the phoenix also has a lot to do with Scorpion tendencies. And the bull, which is obviously a Taurus, right? So these are kind of the archetypal creatures for the four temperaments. And in Ezekiel, it is very clear, right? And of course, if you study your Veda, you're going to know that they're hot and dry and wet and cold types. And it is very similar, though the four elements are not exactly one-to-one, right? There are some things that are typically earth that apply more maybe to air and sun, to Aquarius or the man. So instead of seeing them as elements, if you do look at them as the archetypes of a man, lion, bull, and eagle, you will understand this quite easier than if you try to have a correlation one-on-one to the four temperaments, although there are a lot of similarities, right? So essentially, we do have it in the same way that there are, in the doshas in the Ayurvedic tradition, certain percentages of each involved in it, right? Because if we were 100% one, life would be so extremely difficult for us that I don't think we would live very long, right? Because it would be completely out of balance. So we're going to talk about the four temperaments, and if you do, there is a lot of information with the Hippocrates, like the four like bile, blood, phlegm, right? The four phlegms. So if you look at Hippocrates' temperaments, or if you look at his names, you'll find a lot more, right? So sanguine is the same. For example, the nervous, he refers to it as melancholic, and lymphatic, he refers to phlegmatic. But the bilious is also the same, right? So if you look for that, you'll find a lot of information which is consistent, but not necessarily exactly one-to-one comparison. There is a little bit of information that may be incomplete. And these are more of the four traditional names for it, right? And the Egyptian tradition was kept alive by several families and people and experts and schools of thought. So I like these names and these schools more so than the schools that came up from Hippocrates in Greece, and that took that explanation. So far, do we have any questions? Please feel free to go ahead and interrupt and open your mic and ask any questions. I prefer, because if you have a doubt, someone else can have the exact same question, and I would like for them to be addressed. And if you're too shy to open your mic, you can go ahead and type it in via the chat. So we're going to get started with, I didn't do them in a specific order, but we're going to be speaking first about sanguines, right? So sanguines, their archetype is obviously a lion, right? It's that Leo fiery kind of temperament. And they are courageous like the lion. They're generous and optimistic. So these are kind of the best people to have at a party, kind of the party animals. They're actually the best at digesting alcohol, or not digesting, well, processing alcohol. They are spontaneous, fun-loving, charming. They can be great communicators because they have that passion kind of emotion and passion are very key words with sanguine. When they love you, they give their whole heart to you. They're living in that moment. And when they hate you, they really do hate you 100%. And that's really hard for them to control as well. They're optimists, right? They're kind of eternal optimists. If you realize kind of the similarity to astrology, is that fire tends to be either optimistic or angry, and this is kind of the same way for sanguine people. They are either they feel emotions very intensely. So when that emotion, that passion of optimism gets going, then it gets going really intensely. That's what they feel. But when also anger gets going, they feel that very intensely as well. So they tend to run out of gas. So they're not really great long distance runner. They have a great start. So they are short distance runner, but they can export a whole bunch of power and force intensely at the beginning, and then they tend to run out of gas quite quickly. They're not very detail oriented, don't like to plan at all. That's why they live in the moment of that emotion. Hot-blooded, right? They're impatient, impulsive, demanding, and self-certain tyrants when things go wrong, when they don't have kind of that self-control, that ability to look at themselves, when they have a whole bunch of yes men, or they're very angry. They can be very tyrannical, right? But they can also be and very empathic leaders, because they really do love someone when they love them 100%, when they feel that love, right? There's a lack of empathy, specifically when they go into battle mode, because they have either this switch of love or battle. I'm enjoying myself and just enjoying myself and giving my all and laughing and loving, or I'm angry, or I just turned off and I'm in rest mode. So they have these switches that you can see very easily, right? So when they do get angry, that they're not going to be very empathic, and they see things as a battle. So when they're fight mode, so they're lovers and fighters, and when the switch goes from lover to fighter, they don't feel any empathy, right? And they see things as a battle. They tend to see everything as a battle, and that's what allows them to get stuff done. But once they start doing things, it's difficult. They do need breaks to keep going, because they can lose track, and specifically because of that mental energy that gets drained that quickly. They tend to be very territorial, and they have the difficulty seeing still. This is specifically more so for children. Adults don't have necessarily that hard of a time sitting still, but their attention span isn't that long. Unless they really, really love something, and even then, they prefer to have things in small doses. It's not that they can't learn, they're not teachable. It's just that they need small bits of information and then to apply and do, right? So more so kinesthetic and learners, and definitely small doses is best for them. Conor McGregor is kind of a stereotypical sanguine. If you realize, if for those of you that like UFC, he's got a great history for being incredibly dangerous in the first 1 or 2 rounds. If not, he loses that dangerous power quite quickly. Bill Clinton, although he's not a pure sanguine, he does have some flesh covering his jaw, so it does make him a bit lymphatic, but he is mainly sanguine. It's his main temperament, right? Any questions so far, guys? It's very important that we do address them.
I do have question, comments. So are you saying that we are not necessarily just one temperament? You can have multiple temperaments?
Yes,
Or
most
combination?
people have a main temperament, right? Something that composes most of them. But yeah, for example, sanguine, nervous, and lymphatic, right? And I think I was talking to you the other day, and I was telling you that you're mainly, you're a combination almost of nervous and bilious, right? So yeah, we do, and we can see this morphologically. Like, I love morphology because it's very clear. So when we're studying temperament and morphology, we look at 3 main points, which is the forehead. If you realize the sanguine forehead is tilted down. Can you guys see my pointer? Let me see if I can get a different pointer going. I don't know how this goes. Okay, so the sanguine forehead is tilted, much like the nervous forehead. If you realize, kind of, it's like a slide. It's all like a almost like 45-degree angle here, and their chin and jaw protrude outward. They quite have a large and powerful jaw. That's kind of, in general, the 3 points we're going to look at specifically: the forehead, the chin, and the jaw. And well, if we look at the nervous, this is a little bit angled, right? This has a little bit of an angle, but in general, yeah, the forehead is very similar, but their chin doesn't stick out at all. In fact, it goes in a bit, and their jaw doesn't go down at all. It almost starts directly out from the ear. So morphologically speaking, we look at the profile, at the side view of the face, and not all people will look exactly like this. They will have certain modifications, and those modifications will be more sanguine, lymphatic, and nervous. So yes, to answer your question, we are different percentages of these. For example, the skin tone, and for example, if your race is a darker skin, the palms of your hands are going to be red or white or darkish or yellowish. So there is a skin tone that also plays into this. And of course, if there's a race that's very dark and well, doesn't allow you to see like the temperament color, this palms of your hands actually do, right? So if you see the palms of my hands are kind of reddish, and they do have a kind of a reddish hue to me, and that is a sanguine tendency. But obviously I do have kind of a long attention span. Well, not always, but generally. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions before we move on to the nervous, about the sanguine, or in general about temperaments? Nope. Okay, so continuing with the nervous, they are the quickest mind of all, and they're not patient. Their mind is so quick and creative that creativity can be turned into like just artists and geniuses in is music or in painting or whatever they dedicate themselves to. But that creativity can be turned into a living hell if it's not calmed down and directed in a productive manner. So they have an avalanche of quick reactions. It's so difficult for them to hold in that impulse. But they tend to be passive, and not the reason why I mentioned passive. I really want to make this clear. It's not that they don't stand still. No, on the contrary, they want to do a lot, and their mind is so quick, and they might go from one room to the other. But because their mind is so quick, it's very difficult for them to plan out consistent actions and go ahead and realize them. So I used to live with this girl that was completely nervous, and she would just complain about having so much to do with her doctorate. And she would go from one room to the other, just going on about how she has so much to do and not do anything, because their mind is so quick. It's difficult for them to channel that into actions. So they can be 3 times as quick as a sanguine, for example, whose mind tends to be a little bit slower. Difficulty in hearing people right out, because they want to interject, they want to say everything that they're thinking. Rich imagination and creativity, that's just the most creative mind. Like, most artists will have at least a little bit of nervous. It's almost impossible for you to be a great artist and not have any nervous qualities or develop them over time, because you realize this is your bone structure, and bone structure takes many years to change. So there's so a lot of people ask me, well, can your temperament change? There's a little debate about that. Some authors say it doesn't, and some say yes, but over many, many years and constant their exposure tendencies. So generally, no. There are exceptions. For example, when we talk about bilious, their willpower is the most intense out of all these. So you can develop willpower over many, many years with practice, with repetition, and that can change your temperament, but it will not happen overnight, and it will not happen over 1 or 2 years. It takes many years. Now, of course, I don't like to generalize. There are exceptions, and I'm sure I'm open to maybe someone who was able to do that, but they are so, so, so rare. Generally, we can say no. So they are overwhelmed by feelings because they are very, I would say, almost energetically empathetic. Like whoever they're pointing out, if you see their nose, which is in morphology, has a lot to do with your emotional life, is pointed out so they kind of lead with this emotional perception. If they are in an anger person, they will absorb that and become altered themselves, right? But for example, if the sanguine tend to go more towards positivity or anger and action, the nervous will go more towards frustration or fear, anxiety. I think anxiety or fear are more accurate. So even if they feel angry at the beginning, they will quickly turn that anger into anxiety or fear, just like the sanguine. If they feel anxiety or fear, they might turn that into anger. Any questions so far? I'm going to go ahead and continue about the nervous types. So you tend to be volatile, but they are more reactive to what's going on outside of them. So if they get pressured by someone or some event, that will trigger a lot of emotional and mental instability. They are needy as far as they like being attention. They like having attention on them, but they, hide it well with this kind of charmness, and like kind of, they pretend that they don't really need people or need acceptance, but they really do. All human beings do, but there are temperaments that really require it more than others. And they have a lot of abstract insight. They are able to just invent all these new ways of doing things or recycle old things in new ways. It's really an incredible amount of I would say innovation and creativity is just kind of what they can change, right? And movement, especially mental movement, is what really defines them. So some example of nervous is Walt Disney. If you realize he's almost a pure nervous, he does have a little flesh covering his jawline, so he's not a pure nervous. But if you realize Woody Allen, his jawline kind of continues from his ear. It doesn't really drop down much at all. So this is a nervous kind of jawline. And if you realize it is kind of curved or kind of an arrow shape, it doesn't go straight down. You guys see that?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. So any questions about the nervous or temperaments in general as this is progressing, or can we continue? Go ahead and continue. Okay, so we're going to be talking about a little bit of the bilious. So their strong body and will. They tend to be more on the short side, right? Not necessarily if they're not pure bilious, but they are the ones that need the least rest. Kind of 5-6 hours of sleep at the most, maybe even 4 or 5, right? They are good with that amount of sleep. And they tend to assume that other people are lazy because they're not wired like them, because they need more rest. They are quite judgmental of others because they don't understand that they are different to them. They are wired different. So they have a strong need to understand the situation. If something does not make sense to them, they will fight you to death because their need for logic and productivity and just to understand. They have a very strong need for safety. And more so than predictability, like they need to understand and have control over things, because control, they understand, keeps them safe, right? This strong will that they have takes, for the other temperament, takes a really long time to develop. They naturally have that. So they just encourage everyone, oh, why can't you just be more like me? Because we're different. They do have a very strong need for autonomy, for this kind of independence. They tend to be positive pessimists, which means they will see the negative in everything, but it doesn't bring them down. They like a challenge. They don't mind going into projects that takes them years to develop, because they are more detail oriented and they love the hard work and they love seeing the results. And they would be kind of the builders of the world. And they are highly intellectual and a lot more logical, but they lack empathy and sensitivity. So it is, if you're bilious, this is very important for you to understand that empathy is understanding the other person, and they are different, trying to see what their logic is for doing what they did, because kind of the motto for bilious is, oh, why, I don't understand why he did that. Yeah, because you're not him. Try and think why he would possibly do that. And that's more of a nervous kind of ability more than a bilious ability. The nervous can put themselves more easily in the other person's shoes. Some examples of bilious is, well, if you realize Bruce Willis is almost a pure bilious. This part, the middle part of his face, protrudes a little bit more than the rest. So he's almost 100% bilious, I would say. Maybe a little bit nervous, but almost not, because he's an actor, right? But these two guys are basically 100% bilious. His jawline seems to be nervous, but that's because he's facing kind of upward. I saw other pictures of his face when he's not looking upward. They're both kind of have an angle upward, but their jawline normally does go down, and their face is kind of flat, right? So these are kind of bilious sides of the faces, the profile. Any questions about the bilious type? Okay, great. So
I have a question.
Of course, go for it.
Would bilious make the best athlete then?
One of the best long distance runner. Long distance sports, more for a long time. If I would say the best short distance athlete or sprinter would be sanguine. The nervous can be a short distance runner, or things that don't require too much time or cardio as well. But for example, their bones tend to be a little bit more brittle, so it would take them much longer time to develop stronger kind of constitution than the other. But both the sanguine and the nervous do well in sports that don't require too much cardio or too much kind of a lot of stamina. But yeah, definitely for long distance sports and runners, it's either be bilious or lymphatic. More so bilious, because they can go longer without eating than the lymphatic by nature. Did that answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, for example, the sanguine in the beginning can output way more energy than a bilious. But if a bilious can hold off, like most of the fights that Conor McGregor lost, he lost because he wasn't able to knock the person out in the first couple of rounds. Okay, so lymphatic. These are the visionaries of the world. They are by far the most tolerant and most patient of the temperaments. They tend to see the forest, not necessarily the tree, as Peter Wrestling says. So they do, like the bilious, have more stamina. They can go without rest, but they do need more sleep in general. So they can go all day working, but at a slower rate than the bilious, and they do have a greater need for food and sleep. They don't necessarily need to defy authority, but they're not, if they don't think it's best for them to do what you told them to do, they might just ignore you anyway. They might say, yeah, sure, whatever, and just go ahead and do whatever they were going to do. It's not like they're manipulable and pushovers, more so than they are slower to take action normally, which is, for example, Warren Buffett, he's had this flesh around his jaw for most of his life. So, I mean, that is good as far as wait and see kind of strategy. And sometimes that is very necessary in life. They're least likely to become discouraged, right? That is something that's, but they don't work as fast. Like just like the zodiac sign Taurus, they're very like hard workers, but it's at their own rate. You can't really rush them. And their terrible tendency is that they can explode in rage when their kind of sack of resentment fills. So they're gonna like kind of fill the sack of resentment, fill it up, and then until it gets enough, and then they'll explode in rage, cool off, and then they're back to being nice, friendly people again. Once they explode, then they're back to wanting to please you and being a kind of the tolerant friend. So James Galvini, like the side profile is very much like a bilious, but they have flesh, kind of skin and fat covering their jawline. Any questions? So far, everything's clear? Cool. So this will lead to different health requirements. For example, the lymphatic do not need much water. Sanguine, they need a lot of water. The bilious and the sanguine, they tend to process alcohol pretty well, but the bilious don't tend to go to that much excess like a sanguine does. So the side of your face is your temperament, but the front part of your face, right, is your personality. That's how you adapt. And if you realize, when these are some photographs of soldiers before, during, and after war, before, during, and after war, and this is just before and after. If you realize your face can change, for example, this is 4 years difference. I think this was like 2 years difference. I don't remember the two, but this was 4 year difference. So if you realize how much he changed in 4 years, it's an incredible amount, just an incredible amount. So your face will change much quicker than your profile, than your temperament. Is this clear, guys? Yeah. Just chat. Okay. So excellent. I love people interacting, at least in the chat. Excellent. All right. So when we are speaking of personalities, there are kind of the 7 basic ones, just like the 7 basic planets of the zodiac. But over time, there have evolved. Or as we observe, just like we discovered more planets in humanity, we have developed kind of different analysis and seeing little differences in people. So we have 12, just like we have 12 zodiac signs, we do have 12 face shapes and different characteristics of the faces. So we're not going to go over each of them. We're going to go over kind of the 7 traditional ones just for time purposes. But if you understand these, the other 5 we're not covering are kind of extensions and modifications of the basic 7. Clear? Just thumbs up or yes, so we can continue. Yes. We're gonna go ahead and begin with Venus, right? The Venus type is kind of the they do have the lowest energy level of the different temperaments or personalities, because it's most of this I took this from different sources, and some of these just for example, Peter Resnick handles this as just personalities, just adaptations, but there are some systems that will use the 7 traditional planets, and they basically say they don't differentiate between temperament and personality. They kind of just say this is the person's nature, which I don't necessarily 100% agree with, that the nature can be so varied. There are certain elements that are in our true essence, but again, we will tend to behave, and there are kind of like algorithms and general tendencies that span across humanity and across living things. So The Venus kind of, they have the lowest energy of all. They're very sensual, kind of, they always seem like they're higher. It's kind of typical hippie, kind of, surfer dude, kind of just very chill. Not saying all surfer dudes are chill, but they're slow and kind of, they almost seem sleepy. They tend to touch you a lot, and they're kind of, they're the ones that tend to be the most tendency to be psychic, right? To be very intuitive. And they will kind of drain your energy if you're in the same room with them having a conversation, but they mellow you out. Like, it's kind of an energetic exchange. They'll kind of suck your energy, and in exchange, they'll kind of just make you chill. So they're really kind of cool people to be around if you are kind of have too much energy or are nervous. You might end up giving your nervous energy to them, but you'll be more chill, right? They say yes to everything. That's their way of conserving their energy, because they do tend to be very low energy by nature. They will just say yes to whatever, even if they don't do it, because that's their way of just handling life, right? So kind of their big lesson in life is to learn the consequences of not planning and take action of their life and take charge of a life, right? They are usually either beautiful or have more feminine qualities to them. And this is can come from kind of this adaptive mechanism of, if I'm pretty, if I don't kind of have conflict with people, like I get ahead in life where I just get by, right? And because they're easily satisfied, they know they're going to probably stay alive and be okay no matter what happens, right? So this does kind of, the universe kind of working in their favor, and they don't tend to kind of grow up very much in life. But they could, if they were a little more balanced, they could have a much better life, right? Any questions about the Venus temperament, or sorry, Venus personality, before we move on to the kind of the moon personality? Yes, no, maybe? Cool. So the moon personality has also low energy level, not quite as much as, but their way of conserving their energy is to say no to everything. If you realize if you're sleepy or hungry or tired, you're going to tend to say no, to stuff. So when you don't have enough fuel, we tend to become more negative, and this is one way of conserving energy. The other strategy is to say yes to everything. Don't, why get into a fight? You're saying yes or no, it's going to not really have conflict. No, yes, that's it. You stick to it. So they tend to be cold and critical, and they really don't require other approvals. There's some people that say, oh yeah, I don't care what other people think. No, these guys really don't care what you think. They tend to be solitary and moody. They do have friends, and the ones that they do have are very close. One of the reasons they like to be they're solitary is because they, much like kind of the previous temperament, they will absorb your emotions, and that tends to be too much for them. If you are feeling negative emotions, it tends to be overwhelming, and so they want to be alone. They tend to be more pale, mysterious, kind of perfectionist and motivated, nocturnal people. Like I mentioned, they have very few friends. Well, they have a handful of friends, maybe 5 friends, close friends, but they consider family, right? They take the time to understand new concepts, so please don't rush them. Just like the lymphatic, it's an off branch of the lymphatic, like we were speaking. These are categorized, right? So lymphatic would be more like Jupiter, Moon, or even Neptunian personality. There is a correlation between these. There are similarities, and we can't have one temperament and a different personality. And normally that's something great. If a strategy for life has been working for us, we will tend to perpetuate that. But the argument is it really working for you? Because if it's your tendency, or can you really not see clearly, and do you think it's working for you? It's something we really have to keep in mind. Yes, question. Someone? Oh. Okay. Well, so yeah, if you don't want to have a hard argument with these guys, please don't rush them, right? So, and their kind of big lesson in life is to work on more personal relationships, kind of push themselves outside their comfort zone without, not respecting their nature. They are going to need to rest and be away from people more so. But if they give in to that, they're just going to perpetuate just this way of dealing with things, and it's not going to be a very balanced life. It's not going to be a very happy life, because we all do need human interactions to be happy, right? Very good. So we're going to talk about the Jupiter personality, and these guys almost have normal energy level. It's still a little bit lower. And part of the reason why I think it's lower is because they give it all away to people, and they expect a lot from people. They tend to be very maternal people and like loving, helping, well, paternal if it's a man, right? But in general, they're just so attentive and nice and generous, and they love. They love feeling love from other people. When they don't have love, they'll settle for kind of praise or compliments. When they don't have that, they can switch to like emotional blackmail and pity. They like attention in general. They kind of feed off that, and they prefer love and admiration. If they don't have that, they'll just go to the next best thing. They love sweets. They tend to love sweets. If you realize, that's kind of my personality. And the face shape is kind of like that. They must learn to raise their self-esteem and not base it off other people. And learn to love themselves and give themselves that love first, because they tend to prioritize other people's needs above their own. That is a big thing with this personality. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So Mercury. They are like Loki, like Hermes, all these kind of archetypes of just a very quick-minded, nervous, creative person. They'll find loopholes in everything. They'll make a kind of a game out of everything when they're kind of in a positive state. But they tend to be kind of selfish, and this makes them kind of a good salesman and be able to lie quite quickly. But also very intelligent, but their energy is more creative, not so much analytical. If they have to go in and read an entire book, no, it's more of I read like the first half of the chapter, and then I derive a whole bunch of theories from this because I'm so creative. And they are really good at coming up with like new things, but they have a hard time getting the basics down, understanding things in depth, right? So this quick mind, just like the nervous type, can turn very quickly into paranoia, anxiety, hypochondria, an excessive inner dialogue that can drive them crazy. When we speak about entertainers, I mean, a lot of entertainers have this kind of face in a mind, just like very much like the nervous. And if you realize, if we go back to this, both the Mercury and the long Mercury, they both are offshoots of the nervous temperament. That's why, if it sounds familiar to you, it's because it is related to that. So these guys have a hard time finishing projects. And they learn to focus on finishing one. Yeah. And your face shape, Mr. Edwin, who mentioned this, is these guys' face shape is a triangle, like an upside down triangle like this. Not so much this, right? But if we were to look at face shapes, this is much more triangular. Where are we? Is there a triangular face here? Inverted triangle, kind of like this. And they can be shorter or longer. So yeah, you do have that face of a Mercury, definitely. As far as the Saturn personality goes, they are more structured, kind of. If we really have a hard time improvising, they don't plan everything out, they get really tense, right? They're very order and structure, very analytical. They have a whole bunch of energy, but it's mostly analytical energy. they're very solemn and intellectual. They tend to be on time or early to things, serious and moderate. Just and fairness is something that's very keen to them. And they are very intellectually motivated. And they're good at explaining. They'll take the time to explain subjects to you and give you a lot of context. They're very gracious in this manner, right? Very rigid in their thinking, but they can change your mind if you really give them good examples and really good basis as to why things happen. You can get them to change their mind, but normally because they're so intelligent that they've thought about most circumstances and most probabilities and most things work. So it's very hard to get them to change their mind, right? So, and they are excessively responsible, so they need to learn to flow, to adapt to life, to take action and not have a kind of over-analysis paralysis. The last personality we're going to be talking about is kind of Mars personality. So they are very high in physical energy. They have the highest energy out of all of them, but it is physical energy. So God help you if you have a Mars child or a Bilic child. The amount of sleep you will get will be very little. I do not envy parents of Bilious or Mars kids. They tend to be too direct, practical, because they're action-oriented and they're result-oriented, right? So that can lead to anger, and they might even just wake up in a bad mood because they thought they had taken care of something and they have to do it again, right? So that they don't shy away from conflict at all. And they can be destructive. Like, it's not very creative, their energy there. It's very direct. It doesn't take a lot of creativity to punch something, right? But because it doesn't take much, but they do have a lot of physical energy to give. So get these kids into sports. Get them into sports so they can waste their energy, right? Because if not, they can get channeled in very destructive or negative things, right? They don't really care about getting things done in the best way possible, just the fact that it gets done, and they'll focus on the immediate solution, right? So, kind of like Trump, like he didn't care the best way for it to get done, just get it done anyway, right? They don't really think things through in kind of this conscious and kind of long-term results or consequences to that. They must make a game, competitive game and everything. They kind of have that drive. Oh yeah, I have a comment that says that this was her as a kid, but he grew out of it a bit. Well, I'm glad you found different ways to deal with life. I'm glad your personality changed. Because these guys, if they're leaders, they can get a lot accomplished, but they're not really liked, right? So unless they're with people that think in a similar fashion to them. So they do learn to be diplomatic because they're definitely more interested in a battle than in compromising and entering into a kind of give and take and prioritizing the other person's need and whatnot. So you have to learn to give these guys very interesting challenges. And that's going to keep them busy. That's how you interact with them. If you have a really close friend or a partner that's a Mars, give them tasks, challenges, and they'll get on that, right? Let's see. Well, thank you guys for your attention. I will take any questions now. If you guys wish to donate anything for this talk, I appreciate it. But please don't feel obligated to. This is something I did for me, so I don't have to take too much time out of my consultation to explain this to my clients, so they do get to know themselves better. And I love talking about the subject, but I don't like repeating the same information over and over again. So I did this for me, I did this for my clients, and I kind of did this to get this word out. This is not anything that's original or mine. There's just a lot of stuff that I studied from many different sources, but I think one of the schools of thought that I mentioned at the beginning was the best. So I will be taking questions for the next couple minutes. Please, guys. Any questions, comments, observations?
So if one wants to become your client? How does one do that?
Well, I would prefer you guys send me an email and then I'll get in touch with you. I use WhatsApp a lot, but I do take some consultations. So you guys can send me an email, or I'm going to leave well, I'm not sure if you get my phone number out. Just because this is good, I'm putting this video on YouTube and I don't want just any person just to call me. But please send me just an email, and through that email we'll communicate and we can set up a consultation. Is that it? No questions,
Awesome.
guys? So
Thank you.
either I'm really good at explaining this or you guys are just really, really intelligent. Oh, thank you, Miss Kylie, for recommending me. I'm going to assume that it's both. I'm going to assume that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's very important for you to begin digesting and processing this information by analyzing yourself. So you're not just limited. Thank you, Mr. Fisher, for the comment. So for example, I'm gonna take this off for a second. So that's my profile face. Can you guys see my profile? Just please in the chat say yes or something, because I can't hear you right now. But if you see my profile, it's a nervous because this is kind of curves. Let me go back a second. So if you realize I have this curvature, so this is kind of my main temperament. But instead of my chin following that curvature, it juts out, very much like a sanguine. So I have a nervous temperament, a little bit of sanguine temperament because also my skin is red, and a lymphatic temperament, which gives me a little bit more patience. So this is how you're going to start learning to read profiles in people, and specifically with yourself first, understanding yourself. And if anyone wants to turn their camera on and have me kind of analyze their profile, we can go ahead and do that right now. But it's important for you first to know yourself, so you know what you need to work on, your tendencies are, so you're not just ruled by your tendencies, and you have some structure to keep yourself, okay, maybe this isn't the best way of handling this. Maybe this isn't the best way of looking at this. Maybe there are other ways that can help you out more. And that will set some structure in place, right? Anyone want just a quick profile reading? If you have any questions on what you are, remember guys, that the skin tone really does help. If you see the palms of your hand, mine is red. That is sanguine, and my chin jutting out.
I'll be honest, my beard is a little bit hard to see mine. So
okay, let's see. Let's go ahead and try. Let's see the profile. Yeah, and that is true with beards. It is kind of a harder thing. Let me go ahead and let's see that pen.
Does the light help?
Let's try the light. Yeah.
I don't want to
So nervous, kind of bullshit, and you can't see your jawline, right? So nervous and lymphatic.
Yeah, it kind of goes inwards. Yeah, it kind of goes into my skin a little.
There's fleshiness that doesn't make it so defined. Yeah, so nervous and lymphatic, and a little bit sanguine because I'm guessing your skin tone is kind of reddish.
It is, yeah.
The palms, if you look at the palms of your hands, yeah. So you're mainly nervous and lymphatic with a little bit of sanguine. So it's a pretty decent balance because that lymphatic gives you patience, right? My wife was asked like by one of her friends, like, what attracted you most to him? And he's like, oh, his patience. And I think that's the reason I still have my wife currently, is because this patience kind of balances us out. And well, I mean, I love her with all my heart. She's such an awesome woman. Any other questions, guys?
No, that was it. Yeah.
Well, guys, I really appreciate you guys being here. And next month, I'll figure out what I'm going to be talking about, and I'll be giving these talks every month. I appreciate you guys being here and learning and giving me a chance to explain things, which I love so much. Peace, guys. Much love.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.